The branch snaps. Ivan stumbles backward into the snow, the crack of the wood swallowed instantly by the roar of the blizzard. His hands are shaking, not from fear, not yet, but from the cold that has been eating through his gloves for the last 40 minutes. He looks at the broken ridge pole lying useless at his feet, then up at the sky. The light is dying, and he has nothing. 20 minutes earlier, he had a plan. He had hiked 6 kilometers into the Siberian backcountry alone, no tent by choice, carrying only a knife, a length of paracord, and the kind of stubborn confidence that only reveals itself as arrogance when things go wrong. His friend Dmitri had stood at the trailhead, watching him disappear into the tree line, shaking his head. "You are not Bear Grylls," Dmitri had called after him. "You are a 34-year-old accountant from Novosibirsk." Ivan had laughed. He was not laughing now. The blizzard had arrived 2 hours ahead of the forecast. Not unusual for Siberia, but catastrophic for a man who had staked his survival on a weather report. The temperature had dropped 12 degrees in under an hour. He could feel it in his jaw, in the bones behind his eyes. He had maybe 70 minutes of workable daylight left. He needed 4 walls and a roof or something close enough. He pressed both hands flat against a pine tree and breathed. Slow. "Think," he said out loud. His voice sounded small against the wind. "You know this. You have practiced this. The A-frame, the oldest shelter in the human playbook. A ridge pole between 2 trees, branches angled down either side like a ribcage, packed dense with boughs until the wind has nowhere to enter. He had built one before, in his backyard in July in 15-degree weather with a cup of tea nearby. This was not that, but the geometry was the same. Physics did not care that he was scared. He found a fallen birch, thicker than his first attempt. He tested it, bent it slightly, felt the resistance. Good. He dragged it into position and lashed one end to a forked branch 6 feet off the ground, paracord biting into his numb fingers as he worked the knot. Then the other end. He stood back and pushed the pole hard. It held. Something in his chest unclenched. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay." The rib branches came next, long, flexible limbs dragged from the snow and propped against the ridge at a steep angle, close enough together that a hand pressed flat would feel no gaps. His arms burned. His back ached. At one point he dropped to his knees in the snow and for a moment, just one, he thought about sitting down, about resting. He knew what that meant in temperatures like these. He had read the reports. Hypothermia does not announce itself. It flatters you, tells you you are fine, that you just need a moment, that sleep would feel so good right now. He stood up. The bough layering was the part that mattered most and the part nobody talks about. Pine boughs woven thick and overlapping like roof tiles, starting from the bottom and working up so each layer shed water and wind onto the one below it. He worked in silence now, the kind of silence a man falls into when the body has nothing left to spend on words. The wind screamed at him. He ignored it. Branch by branch, the shelter took shape. It looked rough. It looked ugly. It looked like something that could keep him alive. He crawled inside just as the last gray light dissolved into dark. Inside, the silence was almost violent in its contrast. The howling that had filled his skull for the last 90 minutes dropped to a low moan, filtered and muffled by 15 centimeters of layered pine. He could hear himself breathe. He lay on his back on a floor of packed boughs, insulation between him and the frozen ground, and stared at the ceiling of his creation. Needles and bark and paracord and the stubborn geometry of a V-shape that humans had been trusting with their lives for 10,000 years. His phone had 1 bar of signal. He sent Dmitri a single message. "Shelter built. Alive. You were right about the accountant thing." 3 seconds later, "I told you. Also your wife called. She says dinner is at 7 if you survive." Ivan laughed. A real laugh, loud and full, bouncing off the walls of his tiny wooden world while the blizzard tried to erase everything outside of it. The shelter shuddered. It held. Of course it held. He had built it with his hands in the dark in Siberia, when everything went wrong and the plan fell apart and the ridge pole snapped and the light disappeared and none of it, not one single thing, had gone the way he imagined. And he was still here. That is what willpower looks like when it has no other option. No tent, No help, just wood and the refusal to quit.